All right, week 3 was a crazy roller coaster. Now we turn the page into week 4 of the fantasy football season. And this week, I'm bringing you every single matchup, every must start, must sit wide receiver going into week 4 of the fantasy football season. So stay tuned. We're going to go straight right into it because there is so much information that I need to be bringing you and tell you coming in. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let's go straight into our first matchup here. The Lions at the Green Bay Packers. Over under 45 Lions are favored in this game coming into this week on Thursday night. Look, we go down this list and you can probably see it already on your screen. The wide receivers that I am starting, risk start and must sit. Amon-Ra, no questions about it that you're going to be starting him coming into this week. So don't overthink it here. You start and you set and forget with Amon-Ra, but the one that I really want to talk about is Josh Reynolds. He is a risky start coming into this week. We saw the first 2 games Josh was a good flex coming in for the first 2 weeks, right? Week 3, he drops a goose egg, but plays 77% snaps for the game, right? So if you're struggling with injuries, I do believe Josh Reynolds could be a good, decent flex option coming into this week. Let's say you had a Mike Williams. Let's say you had Deontay Johnson, who's out right now. Players that maybe you drafted that you can't really trust anymore. I will be starting Josh Reynolds right now. It's a risky start, meaning that he can get you anywhere between 2 points all the way up to about 15 fantasy points coming into this week. So keep that in mind. Obviously, you're not going to be starting Marvin Jones coming into this week. And then going on the Packers side of the ball, you can see it already. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jaden Reed. Look, I put all these guys in my risk category. Christian Watson, yeah, you're going to be starting him because he's Christian Watson, had that capital, that draft capital before, but we haven't seen any production with Jordan Love so far, and I think that is the biggest thing coming into this week. It's a short week. Yeah, he was dealing with the hamstring injury, and I think maybe that's why they sent him out this past week in week 3 to give him the go for on Thursday Night Football. And I think this is it. This is where he can come back, but I do believe it's a risky start because is he going to come back and be on a snap count? Is he going to come back and get any sort of targets? What is that going to look like? I think that's where the risk is. So I do believe he's a risky start, but hey, anticipate him seeing 15 plus fantasy points or getting, below 8 fantasy points. Obviously, Romeo Doubs, it really just depends on Christian Watson. If Christian Watson plays, he's a risky start. But if he doesn't play, Romeo Doubs coming into this week is a good start, in my opinion, a must start coming into the week. We saw what he did this past week, and his snap counts are increasing. Week 2, 76%. Week 3, 86% this past week, which was phenomenal. He found the end zone as well this week, and then it will be the same thing with Jaden Reed. It's all a domino effect. If Christian Watson does play, I'm not sure if I want to start Jaden Reed, and if Christian Watson doesn't play, that moves Jalen Reed into a risky start more than a must sit coming in to week 4. All right, going into the London games, our first London games of the year. Falcons at the Jags. The Jags technically have a home game. That would suck if I'm a Jags fan, I'll tell you that much. I mean, I'll be pissed. I was like, I lose a game if I'm a season ticket holder. Anyways, whole different conversation. Over under 4.3 and the Jags 43.5 for this game here. Jags are favored to coming in. 2 really decent defenses coming in. If you really think about it, as a whole, they've been performing okay, but they have pretty big gaps as well. But for the wide receiver position specifically, you look at the Falcon side of the poll here. Drake London, I think, is the one that could be a must start or a risky start here. I'm going to put him in the must start category. I understand he didn't have the best opportunities this past week. He was targeted last week. He was targeted 6 times, but only caught 2 of those targets. And I think a lot has to do with Desmond Ridder. But what's also good about Desmond Ridder is that the passing attempts keeps increasing week by week, right? First week, we saw him only pass attempts, 18 attempts in week 1. Then it nearly doubles in week 2 with 32. And going into week 3, he passes a little bit more with 38 passing attempts. And I think the more that you pass the ball, obviously the more opportunity your wide receiver is going to get, right? And look, I don't think Drake London is going to get another. Look, maybe he can. Maybe he will get another goose egg. And I don't expect that from him. And I think that's why a lot of people were panicking coming into week 1, or going into week 2, where he dropped a goose egg in week 1. Should I start Drake London? He kind of paid off. Now this week didn't pay off, but still. some good opportunity for you to start Drake London. Now you go to the other side of the ball with the Jacksonville Jaguars here. 3 wide receivers. You can see it on your screen here: Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and Zay Jones, right? Let's start off with Calvin. You start with Calvin. You put him in your lineup. I don't want to spend too much time on there. He caught 3 out of 7 targets. Wasn't really efficient, but I think everything went against the Jags coming into this game against the Texans. Christian Kirk, in my opinion, is a must-start coming into this week. Caught 4 out of 6 and a touchdown. He scored over 15 points in his last 2 fantasy games, last 2 weeks, and I think that's really exciting here. But if you guys been with us in our live streams, Zach has been saying the narrative is that Zay Jones is going to be more on a 2 wide receiver set, and because this could be a trap game, not just a trap game, but a trap scenario, because we saw Zay Jones miss this past week, right? And then he also was in and out of the game in week 2, in week 2, and that's where I believe it could be risky for Zay Jones. But if Zay Jones is on your bench and you are struggling with injuries, know that he's a risky start. But if Zach's narrative is right, maybe he could be worth a start coming into this season. All right, going to the third matchup here: Dolphins at the Bills. Over under. This is one of the highest over unders of the week, 53.5 coming in. The Bills are favored, surprisingly, but I do believe the Dolphins could take this one. I don't know. I really want the Bills to lose, the Dolphins to lose, because the Giants play them in the next coming week. So that's my own personal thing there. But hey, let's go straight into the Dolphins wide receivers. Let's not waste any time. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. If they play, you start him. Tyreek Hill right now. Surprisingly, wide receiver 2 on the year after that game. Keenan Allen is wide receiver 1, but still, both of these guys averaging over 30 fantasy points per game, which is absolutely crazy at this very moment. But hey, it's exciting. You start both of those guys. Jalen Waddle, once he comes back from that injury, he will and should be played. Okay, now you go to the Bills side of the ball. Stephon Diggs, no question, is a must start, so don't really think about that. Wide receiver 5 on the year, averaging over 19 fantasy points so far. Gabe Davis, I think, is a risky start coming into this week. He did catch a touchdown in the past 2 out of 3 games. Now, the only reception he caught this past week in week 3 was a touchdown. Right, he caught 1 out of 4 targets, and that was a touchdown. That really was saved his day this past week. But the way the Dolphins are playing, the way they are scoring the ball, I won't be surprised if Josh Allen is going to be just throwing it down the field and trying to get as many opportunities as he can for Gabe Davis and this Buffalo Bills offense. So if you can, I definitely would try. And if you are in a situation where you need some really high upside, maybe you're 0-3, you want to take a risk because you know your teammate or the person that you're playing has a stacked squad, and Gabe Davis is on your bench, and you're saying he's going to have to score big points. It's a risky start, but I understand if you were to go that way. All right, Vikings at Panthers. Vikings are favored here with 44.5 coming into this week here. Justin Jefferson, no question. Jordan Addison, he is a must start. A good season so far. He's been improving week in and week out. More receptions, more targets, more snaps on the field, which is incredible here. And you kind of see what he's been doing these past couple weeks, right? Now you're going against, this past week he went against a Chargers defense that was terrible. Now you're going against a Carolina Panthers technically who give the second least amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. But oddly enough, they just gave Adam Thielen 30 plus points this past week. So I think this is a little bit skewed based off of, once again, week 1. If you saw last week's video, the past couple weeks, week 1 against the Falcons, they only gave up 100 and something yards in the air because the Falcons were dominating on the ground. Keep that in mind when you come into this matchup here and say, well, it's a bad matchup. People were saying it's a bad matchup just because it's skewed. Okay, KJ Osborne, in my opinion, is a must-sit. I'm not starting him with confidence. I understand he scored that touchdown. That's another reason why his day was saved for that touchdown. So I wouldn't be going there personally. Excuse me. Now we go to the Panther side of the ball. Adam Thielen, I think he's a must-start coming into the season right now. We see what he did these past 2 weeks, against New Orleans, caught 7 out of 9 in a touchdown to over 20 fantasy points. Versus the Seahawks this past week, 11 out of 14 targets, over 145 yards and a touchdown, 31 fantasy points. That's what Bryce Young and Andy Dalton. So you're telling me he can do it with both quarterbacks. Whoever's going to be coming into this week in week 4, if Bryce Young is right now projected to be missing week 4, but if he does miss, or if he doesn't miss it, it's okay, because Adam Thielen has proven what he can do with both quarterbacks here. Now he's the older guy. I'm a little bit scared of injury. Currently wide receiver 7 on the year. But you're going to have to start him with confidence here, especially the way he's been playing. So that's what I'll be doing, starting him with confidence. Now, DJ Chark kind of had his, hey, welcome to this year, breakout game, caught 4 out of 11 targets. Not efficient, but he did find the end zone, scoring 18 fantasy points here. Look, the Vikings get the 3rd most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. This could be a trap game. That's why I put him in a risky start. Now, if you, once again, kind of like everyone else, if you are struggling with the wide receiver position, you have a couple injuries, maybe this is, and you need a high upside play because, you know, you need to win, maybe this could be the play. But I'm not leaning on DJ Chark here. I'm only doing it if I'm really struggling with injuries right now, which we've seen a lot so far coming into the season. Obviously, you're going to be sitting Jonathan Mingo and Terrace Marshall, so let's not waste any more time on that. All right, the 5th matchup coming into this week, the Broncos at the Bears. Both of these offenses, both of these teams are 0-3. One of these teams are going to have to win here. Excuse me, not 0-3, 1-3. The Broncos are. They beat the Raiders in week 1, if I'm not mistaken. So correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. I don't have that ranking in front of me. I'll probably look it up as I go throughout the video. Over under 45.5. Broncos are favored coming into this game here. Look, my 2 biggest takeaways for this team is Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. Now, the Bears currently give up the 14th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position, so it's kind of in the middle of the pack defense right now. Courtland Sutton, I'm not necessarily encouraged and excited to start. He's been averaging over 14 fantasy points per game, so he's been a good flex moving forward. But I do believe those 14 points aren't going to be something that I can lean on and really say, you know what, I can start him with confidence. Now, when you come to our start sit questions and you say, hey, Courtland Sutton or Elijah Moore, or Courtland Sutton or, you know, I don't know, or Calvin Austin, whatever the case may be, maybe we'll lean Courtland Sutton because of the points he's been getting week in and week out, but not somebody I want to start. Jerry Jeudy is my next guy here. Very disappointing so far. Obviously, he's been injured, somebody that hasn't really been seeing the field too much. But I do believe Jerry Jeudy is going to be improving. Obviously, week 1, he didn't play. Week 2 this past week against Washington, only saw 68% of the snaps, caught 3 out of 5 targets. Now against Miami, 76% of the snaps, got 13 fantasy points. If he's getting healthier and healthier and healthier, those snaps percentage will increase, and that's where we can see Jerry Jeudy really shine when he gets to around that 85+ mark of snap shares, which I hope you can see coming into this week here. Once again, the Bears currently give the full 14 amount of points to the wide receiver position, so I think you can see a good game from him. This is what I would say. I'm starting Jerry Jeudy based off talent. Now, if I had to tell you who to start based off statistics, it has to be Courtland Sutton and what we know with the context that we have so far this year. I'm not starting Marvin Mims. I know he's been getting 20+ points. One was because of special teams. The other one was because of a breakout play in week 2. He's only getting 25% of the snap, less than 25% of the snap share so far. Until we see that 50, 60, 70 mark, that's when we can have a conversation here. Now you go to the Bears side of the ball, DJ Moore. This is a guy that I love coming into this year with the whole Justin Fields narrative, and what we've seen for Justin Fields has been very disappointing. It's been something that has really put me off of Justin Fields. It put me off of DJ Moore. This is just garbage time points. We got lucky that he scored that touchdown, what was in the 3rd or 4th quarter against the Chiefs, and I was worried. Only caught 3 out of 6 targets. He didn't have a target, if I'm not mistaken, the whole first half versus the Chiefs, which is really frustrating. Now he's playing the Denver Broncos, who should give him a better matchup. Okay, the Broncos give the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position so far on the year, and we just saw what Miami did to them. They dropped 70 points over 720 plus yards of total offense. Not saying Justin Fields is going to be anywhere near that. Not saying that it's something consistent. But if there's any game that DJ Moore and Justin Fields can have their breakout game and saying, okay, guys, this is who we are. This is what we need to do. It's this game. It has to be this game for Justin Fields and DJ Moore. Now, DJ Moore hasn't been terrible, right? He's been giving you garbage points. Week 2, 16 fantasy points. Week 3, he got 13 points, but not the expectation that we expected and where you were drafting him coming into this year. So keep that in mind when you go into this matchup. But this is the game. I'm going to be watching that game very closely. All right, Ravens at the Browns here. Over under 42.5. Browns are favored coming into this week. The one I really want to talk about is Zay Flowers. I'll get the sits out of the way. OBJ, you want to sit. I'm not starting Nelson Aguilar. I'm not starting anyone else, or Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman is injured right now. I don't believe he's going to be playing coming into this week. But Zay Flowers is the one I want to start coming into this week. I do believe he could be a bit of a risky start just because the Browns currently give up the least amount of points to the wide receiver position. But if they can't get the run game going, with whoever is going to be playing Gus the Bus or Justice Hill, if he's back healthy, I'm not necessarily sure if they're going to result into throwing the ball more. And Zay Flowers is that, right? We saw 10 targets this past week so far. He has had 25 targets in the last 3 weeks so far of the season, which I believe is pretty impressive as a rookie coming in. And he scored over 13 fantasy points. And mind you, this game the weather was horrific. It was terrible. He was still catching the ball while it was raining. Obviously, it dried up at certain points. They did lose this game, and now they're going against a division rival where they need to kind of get everything back together here. So I'm going to be starting Zay Flowers, with a little bit of confidence, a little bit of a risky confidence, okay? I have him in the risk category, but I'm saying, you know what? I can see this offense struggling, but they need to throw the ball, and maybe they're just going to be peppering Zay with targets. So keep that in mind. Now we go to the Browns side of the ball here, which I believe has some good opportunities. The Ravens currently give up right now the 8th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position here. And when you look at this team, Amari Cooper, he's clearly number one for Deshaun Watson, right? He's getting the chunk plays, the targets, the touchdowns, and so on and so forth. When you think of Elijah Moore now, he is a good flex option. He hasn't been amazing. He hasn't been living up to the expectations that I was hoping for, but what I keep leaning on is the targets. Now, when you look at this offense, Elijah Moore is your short yardage gain guy. You're 3rd and 5. You're 3rd and 4. You're 2nd and 5. 2nd and 6. They go to Elijah Moore to get that first down, quick slant route. Like you want to get a first down in Madden, you can do a quick slant route. That's what Elijah Moore does, right? And he gets you those 5 yards. He hasn't gotten the yak yet. He's been averaging 5 yards per catch, which is not amazing so far when you're thinking about it. But the targets are there. 9 targets in the past 2 games. He is up there in targets amongst, a lot of these big wide receivers. Just hasn't been getting, those big chunk plays or been getting the end zone. But if you need a good flex, I think Elijah Moore can be great moving forward. All right, the next matchup on the list here, Steelers at the Texans, over under 41. The Steelers are favored into this game. And let's go on the Steelers side of the ball here. George Pickens, I think, is a risky play coming in, even though the Texans give up the about the 6th, 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. I'm not sure if I'm excited to start them. Just because George Pickens and Kenny Pickett really haven't been seeing that connection, specifically Kenny Pickett. He hasn't been great under pressure. He hasn't been great in the pocket. He hasn't been great with his accuracy. And I'm not necessarily sure if I want to be leaning on George Pickens coming into this week, especially. So he is a risky start for me. He is seeing the targets last week, week 2, he saw 10 targets. Week 3 against the Raiders, he got 6 targets. So it's a decent amount of targets in the past 2 weeks there, but catching 4 out of those 6 targets and catching 4 out of those 10 targets the week before in a touchdown, which really changed the game for him. So very something interesting coming in. Now, Calvin Austin, a lot of people are liking him. Not somebody I'm willing to start, so he is a must sit for me coming into this week. But hey, if he still shows progression, we'll have another conversation. Allen Robinson is also a must sit. So let's go to the other side of the ball here. The Steelers currently give up the 5th most amount of points to the wide receiver position, which is, in my opinion, crazy. I was not expecting that. 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And the Texans, with CJ Stroud, who's been balling out, I think you're going to want to start both of these guys. Nico Collins and Tank Dell, both of these guys have been playing phenomenally. Obviously, let's start with Nico Collins. Didn't have the best game this past week, but you know why? It's because they got the run game going. That was the difference in this game. When Dameon Pierce got the ball rolling on the ground, that's when we saw less passing attempts for CJ Stroud. This was CJ Stroud the least amount of passing attempts we've seen so far in the first 3 weeks for Stroud, because they got the ball rolling on the ground. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen every week. I'm really rooting for Dameon Pierce because I'm a Dameon Pierce believer. But obviously they struggled with defenses coming up, and you have to understand what's going on. Now, if you're saying, well, the Steelers give up a lot of points to the running back position as well, it's true. They do. But the context is pretty important. They played the 49ers in week 1, and then they played Nick Chubb, and then obviously Jerome Ford when Nick Chubb went down. I'm not necessarily sure. I'm not saying Dameon Pierce can't do what they did. I'm just saying I think this defense best attribute, in my opinion, is their run defense when they all come together with TJ Watt. So keep that in mind. But Nico Collins and Tank Dell has been phenomenal. Tank Dell specifically, 2 consecutive games with over seven targets and over 25 fantasy points, something that I started in one of my home leagues. I'm completely obsessed with both of these guys. I'm really excited to see what these guys are going to do coming into week 4. All right, the next matchup here, Rams at the Colts. Rams are favored 45.5 coming into this week, as you can see here. Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell. I mean, you kind of have to start both of these guys. Puka didn't have the best game, not these crazy games that we saw. He did get over 12 fantasy points this past week, caught 5 out of 7 targets. But the one that really kind of popped off here and kind of still very consistent is Tutu Atwell. By the way, you are still starting Puka Nacua coming in, especially the way he's been playing here. They are playing the Indianapolis Colts, who give the 7th most fantasy points to that wide receiver position. So you are starting him with confidence. And Tutu Atwell, I do believe, should be a start coming into this week. I mean, over 17 points week 1, over 15 points week 2, over 17 points this past week. Has been averaging, he's been getting nearly 8 targets per game, okay? Caught a touchdown this past game versus the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday night. He is somebody that you have to start, somebody that you anticipate continuing his workload, right? His targets, his opportunities, his snap share, right? 79% of the snap shares in week 1, 97 in week 2, and we're still waiting for the snap shares to come in for this Bengals game as I'm recording. So keep that in mind. Going to the other side of the ball, the Indianapolis Colts here with Michael Pittman. He is the only one I'm excited to start and confident in starting coming into this week. The Rams are in the middle of the pack defense when it comes down to the wide receiver position. And I'll put my hands up and say I was wrong. I was somebody that was saying, look, Anthony Richardson, a young rookie quarterback, same thing with CJ Stroud, right? I was like, CJ Stroud, you hope to see the strides, but he is producing fantasy relevant wide receivers. The only one that's really not producing consistently so far, I would say, is Bryce Young, but he has been injured now, so let's keep that in mind. Michael Pittman, currently wide receiver 8, and is continuing to get his targets from his quarterbacks, from both quarterbacks, in Gardner Minshew and Anthony Richardson, averaging over 11 targets per game. If you have Michael Pittman, you have to start him no matter who he plays, no matter who his quarterback is, because of how much work he is getting. So don't overthink it. You start Michael Pittman. There's no one else I want to be starting in that game. All right, let's go to the Bucks and Saints. It's my next matchup here. This is a game that should be really exciting, a divisional game. There's always some heated drama here, but look, Mike Evans, I am starting with confidence. No doubt about it. He is Baker Mayfield's favorite wide receiver. I think everyone thought it was going to be Chris Godwin. Nah, it's Mike Evans. 18 points week 1, over 29 fantasy points week 2, over 17 fantasy points in week 3. Saw 10 targets as well. Now, the other side of that is Chris Godwin here. When you think of the opportunities that he's been getting, he hasn't been there, hasn't been up to par, right? And he's been seeing the snap share. It's just the targets. 6 targets week 1. He saw 8 targets in week 2. And then week 3, only 5 targets. I'm not sure if I can trust Chris Godwin moving forward personally. Now, the Saints give up are a pretty decent middle of the pack defense here when it comes down to the wide receivers. So I am putting Chris Godwin in the risky start category, where if there are other options, I'm willing to start them over him. Going to the Saints side of the ball, yes, the biggest headline is that Derek Carr, it could be missing some time. He is week to week right now, but Jameis Winston is stepping in let's eat. That's a W. Let's eat. You love the speeches from Jameis Winston, and it kind of gets you hyped because you know he's just going to air it out for Chris Olave and or Michael Thomas. So I do believe both Chris Olave and Michael Thomas are great must-starts coming into this week. The Bucs currently give up the 11th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. We saw what they did. We saw what who they played. I'm freaking blanking out here. They play the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, that's a completely different team. And with Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, they all had good games with Dallas Goedert as well. Chris Olave, and Michael Thomas are both great starts, must-starts coming into this week, depending on your lineups. My 10th matchup of the week here, Commanders at the Eagles. Eagles are favored, obviously, 44.5 coming into this week here. Let's start with the Commanders side of the ball. Both of these guys have been very underwhelming. Terry and Jahan Dotson. Sam Howell has been polling and feels like his favorite target is Curtis Samuel and Brian Robinson, but doesn't feel the same with Jahan Dotson or Terry. Now, both of these guys are extremely talented. I can't put them in the must-start category. These guys moving forward, until we get better context, until we see Sam Howell targeting them and peppering them with targets, have to be in the risky start category. Let's look at Jahan's targets so far right now. It has not been where you want it to be. 7 targets in week 1, 5 targets in week 2, 4 targets in week 3. Now you go to Terry's targets, 4 targets week 1, 6 targets week 2, and 6 targets in week 3. He's been getting there. He's been feeling like, okay, both of these guys have been an average flex start, not somebody that I'm willing to start because I don't believe their ceiling is that high right now. There's not if you think of Michael Thomas, I feel more confident starting Michael Thomas, right? I feel more confident starting Tutu Atwell over Jahan Dotson and and Terry McLaurin, Nico Collins and Tank Dell over both of those guys. There are Zay Flowers. There's so many people that I would rather start over both of these Commanders wide receivers, which is unfortunate because Jahan Dotson coming into this year is somebody I believed in. It was my guy. It's not panning out to be that way right now, but you have to continue to ride the wave here. So keep that in mind. It's not the best matchup here against the Eagles as well, even though we saw what Mike Evans did this past week to the Eagles. But hey, I think you kind of just have to ride the wave. If you have to start him, I understand. We're going to help you all throughout the week with your start sit questions, so keep that in mind on our live streams. To go to the Eagles side of the ball, let's not waste any time here. You're going to start Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown, okay? Don't overthink it. Don't do anything. You start him. You start them. You start them both. I know Devonta Smith didn't have the best game. That was because it was an A.J. Brown game. Both these guys are going to have on and off games. You saw Devonta Smith go off for the first 2 weeks. You saw A.J. Brown not really having the best 2 weeks so far. So we all know what that is. Going to the Cincinnati Bengals here versus the Tennessee Titans, over under 42.5. Titans are favored. Isn't that crazy? Titans are favored, even though I believe this offense is terrible when you really think about it here. But look, let's go to the Bengals side of the ball. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, you are starting. Jamar Chase had his bounce-back game this past week. Finally, 26 fantasy points, 15 targets. Come on. That's what you want. That's why you draft him in the top 4, top 5 in the first round here. Now, T. Higgins didn't have the best game. Had the targets, had the 8 targets, but dropped a lot of balls there. Only 4 fantasy points. He should have a bounce back game coming into this week against the Titans, but I think you shouldn't be worried about it too much, because the Titans do give the 4th most amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Now we go to the Titans side of the ball here. DeAndre Hopkins. These are risky starts. He's a risky start here. If you look me right in the eyes right now and said Tutu Atwell, DeAndre Hopkins, I'm going to go Tutu Atwell. If you look me in the eyes and say Tank Dell or DeAndre Hopkins, I'm going to go Tank Dell. like Michael Thomas or DeAndre Hopkins, I'm going Michael Thomas. Puka Nacua, obviously, I would say that's pretty obvious. Like, you think of DeAndre Hopkins as a big name, but he's not producing these big numbers that we're expecting. 7 fantasy points this past week. Granted, he did play the Browns, who currently give the least amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position, which is fair. But still, he hasn't been that home run hit. Only week 1 against New Orleans, he saw 13 targets, over 13 fantasy points. And then week 2 against the Chargers, who was also a good matchup, mind you, only scored 8 fantasy points. I think this offense needs to revert back to running the ball more, in my opinion, than throwing it, and then it opens the door up for DeAndre Hopkins. We wait and see, but I think DeAndre Hopkins is a risky start. I understand if you want to start him, but in my eyes, I'm looking at every other option and starting them over him. And Treylon Burks, I am not starting whatsoever. All right, we're going to my next matchup here. Raiders at the Chargers here. Divisional game, 50 and a half. Chargers are favored coming into this week. Devontae Adams, you are starting. Let's not question it. Even at the moment, whoever is the quarterback here, Brian Hoyer, Aiden O'Connell, or Jimmy G, you're starting them against the Chargers, who currently give up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. You're doing that every single day, okay? Jacoby Myers is also a must-start. Myers has been a surprisingly good. This is another question. Jacoby Myers or DeAndre Hopkins? It sounds crazy, but you want Jacoby. Even though Jacoby missed last week, he's already, I'm pretty sure, out-targeted DeAndre Hopkins in his 2 games. Caught 10 targets in week 1 for 2 touchdowns. Caught 12 targets in week 3. Over 15 fantasy points. I'm sorry, Jacoby Myers coming into this week against the Chargers, once again, who give up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Now, going to the Chargers side of the ball, I think you start Keenan Allen. There's no question about it. Now, who to start coming into this week with Mike Williams out for the rest of the season? Coming, I would say, in the first 3 weeks, it has to be Josh Palmer. He's probably one of the biggest pickup on the waiver wires right now. If he's out there in the waiver wires, I do believe he's a little bit of a risky start, because we need to see what that looks like. But I do believe Josh Palmer, we saw what Josh Palmer did as he came into the game. He took over the snap counts for Mike Williams, right? Caught 4 out of 7 targets, over 14 fantasy points, and had that touchdown. But I think that this is going to be a transition. Okay, Quentin hasn't seen too much of the opportunity either. You think of Quentin, who has only played last week wasn't even his most snaps. It was week 1 and 27. Week 3 was 24% of the snaps so far in the field. That was Mike Evans out. As much as I love Quentin, he's not a my guy, but he's a guy I love coming out of the NFL draft. I do believe we're going to see the transition more in the second half of the season with Quentin over Josh Palmer. But coming into this week, if I had to choose one, I am risk starting Josh Palmer, and then I am going to be sitting Quentin Johnston coming into this week. All right, Patriots at Cowboys here. Over under 41.5. Patriots, let's go to the Patriots side of the ball. There's no one on this team I want to start. There's 2 names here that I just want to graze over, Kendrick Bourne and Juju Smith. I don't want any part of them. I don't want to rely on them to go anywhere in my lineup here, so please don't start him at all. There's so many other names I'd rather be starting in other offenses. Now you go to the Cowboys side of the ball here. CeeDee Lamb, you starting without a question here. Brandon Cooks had a decent game. I think there was a little bit of hiccups, right? But when I say he had a decent game, he saw the targets. Right, he didn't have the best game on paper when you think he only had 3 fantasy points. So let me take that back. He didn't have a decent game. He had decent targets. That was his first game back off that injury. Now he has 7 targets, and we saw how this Cowboys team struggled against the Cardinals. Now they're going to come back and play the Patriots, who currently give up decent, not too good, not a lot of points to the wide receiver position, So I do believe we're going to see a little bit of this offense struggling again. But if this team, who just came off a loss from the Arizona Cardinals, now going to play the New England Patriots, you can kind of see them rolling, and Brandon Cooks could be a good risky start coming in to the week here. Okay, and obviously the other player on this team is Michael Gallup, who I do not want to start. All right, next matchup. We have three more matchups coming up here. So we're almost there, guys. Cardinals at 49ers, over under 42. Obviously, the 49ers are favored without a doubt. This is the largest spread so far of the week coming into this week. Let's start on the Cardinal side of the ball. I think everyone here is a risky star. Hollywood Brown, I think the risky star here, but we've seen, you know, Joshua Dobbs really taking, you know, this offense under his command, really targeting Hollywood Brown and really showing us like, hey, yo, like I can do this, right? This is me. This is who I've always been, and I think that's what's really exciting here. 7 targets here. He found the end zone the past 2 weeks, which is also really exciting here. So he's a risky start, but someone that you could start if you really needed somebody. Rondale Moore had a decent game, more opportunities on the ground, obviously, but he's a must-sit coming in to this week for me. In the 49ers side of the ball, you're starting everyone. Deebo Samuels and Brandon Ayuk on the wide receiver room. Let's not overthink that here. You're going to start both of those guys if they play. Kansas City Chiefs at the Jets, Sunday Night Football. Imagine early in the offseason thinking that, oh my gosh, I want to go see Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. Unlucky. I'm sorry. Over 143 for Chiefs are favored, clearly. Look, I am not starting anyone on the Chiefs wide receivers room. Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, Rashee Rice, no matter who it is, I'm not starting anyone here in this offense, to be completely honest. But let's go on the other side of the ball here with Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is the one I want to talk about here because he is somebody that, once again, I kind of spoken about this a lot in the live streams. He's a risky start, okay? But he's getting the targets. Last week, caught 2 out of 8 and a touchdown, 16 fantasy points, and you were okay with it. He caught 5 out of 9, just under 10 fantasy points, and you're not okay with it. He's going to get the targets, but he's not going to get that high ceiling volume that we were expecting, right? That we were expecting with Aaron Rodgers there. So I think this is where I kind of want to say, you know what, risky start. Understand if you have to start him, but there are better opportunities there. And maybe, look, maybe they're going to have to throw the ball a lot more. Maybe they're going to have to air it out, and Garrett Wilson's there because it's the Chiefs, and you expect Patrick Mahomes to kind of go crazy. So it's a risky start, but I'm not really starting him if I need to. If I have other options, I will. Tutu Atwell, once again, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Puka Nacua. You know, I think of Elijah Moore I would rather start. So many other people that I would rather start over Garrett Wilson. All right, last matchup here, Monday Night Football, the Seattle Seahawks versus my beloved New York Football Giants. You're starting everyone in the Seattle Seahawks side of the ball outside of Jackson Smith and Jigba. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, both of these guys, you know, are playing really good so far into the season. DK Metcalf here, wide receiver 19, scoring over 13 fantasy points his first 3 games, which is great. And Tyler Lockett obviously had that crazy of a bad game in week 1, but then we saw him uptick 25 points this past week. Caught 3 out of 7 targets this past week. Wasn't the best. Was a decent flex there with 8 fantasy points. A little bit underwhelming, but I do believe we can see better games and better days from him against my Giants, who are currently in the middle of the pack defense when it comes down to giving fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And as we saw, they played them last year with Adoree Jackson. I don't love that matchup with Adoree Jackson versus Tyler Lockett, so keep that in mind. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I am not starting. And on the Giants side of the ball, I'm not starting anyone. Even though the Seattle Seahawks give the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver position, I can't tell you as a Giants fan and as a non-biased Giants fan who the hell to start coming into this week. I mean, it could be Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, it could be Wan'Dale Robinson, it can even be Sterling Shepard or Isaiah Hodgins. I can't tell you who to start, and I don't want to tell you who to start, so it's a must-sit everywhere else. If I had to close my eyes and pull a name out of the bag and somebody that I really, really want that name to come out, it would probably have to be Darius Slayton. He's a person that has been on the field the most, right? He's been getting all the snap shares. He's been seeing the second most targets in the past 2 games. Last 3 games, if you even include the Cowboys game. Like, the Cowboys game was a fluke, but you think of the targets that he got in the Cowboys game, he even got those targets in that game. So I am wanting to start Darius Slayton coming into this week if I had to choose. But I'm not choosing. I am not in that position. I hope you're not in that position either. But I understand if you have to go there. But if I had to, absolutely, it'll be Darius Slayton. But not somebody that I want to start at all. Guys, let me know. Let us know down below in the comments if you like this format. We went through every single matchup. We try to give you more information. It's a little bit longer of a video. I understand that maybe You know, maybe some information you didn't want to hear, maybe some information you did want to hear, maybe some information that you haven't heard before, which was awesome. Comment down below. Let us know what you think about this format. And before I let you go to flockfantasy.com/land, the best place to support what Zach and I are doing here. Zach, 300 plus players every single week, must starts, must sits coming in the rankings. If you go to that website, wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses. If you play with defenses in your league, Zach is putting all that time and effort in, telling you who you should start and giving out his rankings weekly on Flock Fantasy website. Not only that, you can get a fantasy hotline with myself and Zach saying, hey, who should I start? Who should I sit? Who should I trade? What do you think of my team? What do you think of this team? You know, dynasty, redraft, whatever the case may be. Flockfantasy.com/land, the best place to support what we are doing here. And we can get all the perks, not only from us, but all the other fantasy content creators on the site, guys. So once again, let us know if you like the format. Comment down below. Like the video as always, guys. All love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.